Hello there. Today we're going to look at the King's Pawn opening part 6, which is the Pirc defense. So, for this Pirc defense, let's look at the variations that we have under this Pirc defense first. Okay, this is the Pirc defense opening, which we start with the e4, d6, then white d4, and we move the knight to f6. We will look this again later on. This is just to let you all know briefly on what is Pirc defense. Okay, so under this Pirc defense we have a few variations, so let's just look at it roughly first. So under Pirc defense we have this Australian attack with the position like this. We have a classical variation with the position this. You just can have a look. This is just for an opening. And we have a lion variation under this Pirc defense. So this is how the opening, the position looks for the lion variation. Okay, so now what we do, we're going to see all the variation of moves that we have under this Pirc defense. So allow me to start. Okay, Pirc defense. For the opening, we will start with the position e4. For black, d pawn to d6 square. And then white, this is already in the Pirc defense, but let's go further in a bit. So the white pawn to d4 square. And for the black, we use the knight to f6 square. Okay, this is the opening for the Pirc defense, right? Okay, so now we're going to see what are the variations of moves we can do under this defense. So let's start with a knight first. Let's take the b knight to c3 square. And for black, we can go for the g pawn to g6 square. And we can use the f pawn for the white to f4 square. And we'll go for the black, we use the bishop to g7 square. Okay, if you can see here, this is Pirc defense with the Austrian attack. So this is the position. So further you can just continue your game by moving the g knight to f3 square. And for the black, you can go for the king safety. You can do the castling. And for white, now we can use the f bishop to d3 square. Okay, in this position, as you all can see, it is still under the Austrian attack, but as the VS variation, as you move the bishop forward. So further for the black, if you want to continue the game, you can use the knight to a6 square. So this is how you can continue the game under the Austrian attack Pirc defense. Okay, so we'll look at the next variation of move. So again, we'll see this is for Pirc defense, e4, d6, d4, and nf6. Okay, and again, this is the Pirc defense move. Okay, just now we look at the b knight. Now let's look at the f pawn. So the f pawn to f3 square. Okay, once we move the f pawn to f3 square, this is already under the lion variation. So this is known as the lion's jaw move. Okay, let's see what else we have in this move. So for the black, you can use the e pawn to e5 square. And in this move, we can use the pawn, the d pawn. Maybe not capturing. Maybe let's see what we'll do if we go in front to d5 square. And for the black can move its bishop to e7 square. And for the white also can use these minor pieces, which is the bishop to e3 square. Need this bishop to e3 square. So this is how you can continue the game under this lion's jaw. So in this case for black, you can go for castling. Okay, done. This is if you move the f pawn, right? So let's look at the next variation of move. So for the next, we can look at the bishop, f bishop. Let's say the bishop is used to move to the d3 square. Okay, this is how you can do an opening, continue the game under the Pirc defense. Or maybe you can we can use for the black, we can use the e pawn to e5 square. And let's say in this case we don't go for capture, or we don't go in front, as we have the knight over there protecting. So we'll use the c3 square. So c pawn to c3 square. And for the black, it can develop its minor piece, the knight to c6 square. Right, and then further you can continue the game by using the white knight to f3 square. So this is how you can continue the game under the Pirc defense if you move the bishop to d3 square. Okay, kids? Right. Let's take a look at the b knight again, but this time let's say the knight is moved to the d2 square. In this case, for the black, perhaps can use its e pawn to move to e5 square, and c pawn to move to the c3 square. And in here you can use the bishop for the black to e7 square. And as usual, for the next you can use the knight g knight to f3 square. Right. Okay, for black you can use the b knight to d7 square. So this is how you can develop the pieces under this move if you use the knight to d2 square. Let's look at the opposite knight. Let's look at the g knight. Let's say the g knight now is moved to the f3 square. Okay, and when you move this knight to f3 square, this is known as the Rocher gambit under the Pirc defense. So in this gambit, so the next move would be the black probably could capture the pawn in e4. Right, so and then you can move the bishop to d3 square. And since it's the attack for the knight, so the black knight can go behind to the f6 square to protect itself. And further for the white turn, it can use c4 maybe to c pawn to c4 square. So this game is known as the Rocher Gambit still. So this is quite interesting. Okay, this is if you move the knight to f3 square. Yes. Okay. Now let's look at the next move, variation move. So let's say this time we take the bishop, the minor piece bishop to c4 square. Okay, so in this case, we can go for many moves. We can go for c6, c pawn to c6, c pawn to c6 square, or we can go for this knight capture e4 square. We also can use the move of the g pawn to g6 square. So we have many moves. Let's say just take one. Okay, let's say we use the c pawn to c6 square, and for the white can develop the queen to e2 square, and we can use the d pawn to move forward more to d5. Okay, so in this case, so the white will choose to capture, and black pawn cx d5. So in this game, probably the bishop would like to protect itself. So let's go to bishop to d3. And the next move for the black, you can go for the c6 square. Right. Okay, this is more to black because black started to develop its pieces, minor pieces too. Okay, this is if we move the bishop just now to c4 square. Okay, let's look at the different type of variation. So now let's take a look at the queen. Let's say this time we move the queen. But if we move the queen to d3 square, and for the black we use the b knight to d7 square, and we can use the g pawn to g3 square. Next we can use the e pawn to e5 square. So here we can use the c pawn also, c pawn to c3 square. So this is how you can develop the pieces under this move. So let's say for the black, it's using the e pawn to capture the d pawn. So ex d4, and for the white, it captures cx d4. Okay, so now here you can use the d pawn to d5 square. Sorry, d pawn to d5 square. And here perhaps rather than capturing, maybe we can move it the pawn in front to e5 square. And now it's the knight. So the knight can perhaps, let's say if it moves to the e4 square. And here we can use the bishop. The bishop to g2 square. Right, this is how you can continue the game if the queen is used to move in the beginning. qd3. Now let's take a look at the c pawn. Let's say the c pawn now is moved to c3 square. And we use the g pawn to g6 square. Now perhaps we can use the minor piece of white, which is the bishop, to d3 square. And for the black, still we go for the bishop to g7 square. And maybe the white, we can use the knight to an f3 square. And in this, we have a lot of options. We can go for the castling. So this is how you can develop the pieces for the Pirc defense if you move the c3 pawn. Now let's take a look at the g pawn now. Let's say g pawn is moved to g3 square. And now, so the black will go for, the black will go to g8 square. And bishop can move to the g2 square. And for the black piece, you can use the g pawn to g6 square. And for the white, we can use the knight to c3 square. For the black, we can use the knight also to move to f6 square. Okay, this is how you can develop your pieces under g3 if you move the g3 pawn. Now let's look at the bishop on the c bishop to e3 square. And for the white, we can use in this case, let's say the black moved is a pawn to a6 square. And now for the white, we use the f pawn to f3 square. So for the black, we can use the b knight to d7 square. And for the white, we can use the a pawn to a4 square. So this is how you can roughly develop your pieces here. And let's go furthermore. Let's say for the black, we use the e pawn to e5 square. And for the white, we use the bishop to c4 square. And now, I think the position is good. So we can use the e pawn, the black e pawn, to capture the d4. And then bishop capture d4 pawn. So then for the black probably can move its bishop to e7. For the white, you can go use the knight to e2 square. And as usual, you can go for the castling for the black. So this is how roughly you can use your pieces to move if you move the bishop to e3 square. So I hope you all roughly learned the overview of variations of moves that you have under the Pirc defense. So that's all for the Pirc defense. So just as a reminder to all of you out there, each day has a different shape of it. So kids, create and roll your own shape for today. Thank you and see you all in the next lesson. Bye.